In this video, I'm going to illustrate how to use DataCracker for segmentation. The table at the screen shows the importance that Americans place on a range of different issues. Economy and jobs is the clear number one most important issue, with 90% of people rating it as important. A natural question to ask when looking at such data is whether there are different groups of people with different priorities, and this is what I'm going to explore using DataCracker. I will start by inserting a new page. And on that new page, I'm going to tell DataCracker to find some groups in the data. I select the data that's interesting to me, which in this case is the question asking about the three most important issues, and the various options which I'll ignore, and I'll just click Create Groups and Segments. And DataCracker automatically, using a technique called latent class analysis, which is a sophisticated type of cluster analysis, identifies that there are three segments. Segment 1 we can consider the economy and jobs super important, but they consider defence also to be super important. Indeed, they've all said defence. Segment 2, however, have got a clear number 1 for education and student loans. And segment 3 have given equal billing to each of the economy, healthcare, and the environment. So we have identified three groups of people with different basic priorities for the American government. If we want to understand how these groups differ, we can also go on and create further analyses. So I'm going to insert another new page. On this new page, I'll create a table. In the rows of the table, I'm just going to select some age data. Then across the top of the table, I'm going to replace where it's currently a summary with the segments that we created before. And we can see here that segment 2, for example, are much more likely to be younger people. That is, we've got much higher proportions of people aged 18 through to 34, which is shown by the significance testing. And this makes sense because if you remember from the previous slide, segment 2 were focused primarily on education. Now let's look at a more complex example. This example that we're going to look at here, we have a whole lot of data about the importance that people consider for different things when they're choosing their overseas holiday. We've actually got so much data that we can't see it on the screen. So I'm going to merge together a few of the categories just to make it a bit easier to see. And I do that by going into the Data Manipulation tab on the ribbon. And I just click Merge once I've selected the categories I wish to merge. And I'll merge the upper categories as well. And obviously I can rename them and do other things like sort them. There are lots of other ways we can manipulate the data as well. For example, I might want to convert them to averages, which I'm indeed going to do because it's often the most useful way to understand this type of data. And we can see here that we've got the most important issue being history and culture. I should say natural environment followed by history and culture. And again, the natural question to ask is, do we have segments? And we go through the same basic process I went through before. I'll insert a new page. And on that new page, I'll conduct a segmentation, selecting the importance data. And obviously, I could select many more bits of data if I wanted, but I'm just going to select importance. And this time, rather than letting DataCracker work out how many segments there are, I'm going to tell it that I want to find 3 segments. And obviously, I could change my mind and modify a segmentation if I wanted to later. And again, it uses latent class, this time with the numeric data, and it identifies a series of segments for me. They haven't quite fit on the page because I've got quite a lot of data, so I'm just going to scroll a bit up so they all fit onto the page. And we can see here that there's little column charts, or what are technically known as histograms, showing the distribution within each of the segments. So segment 1, we can see they've primarily got really low scores, so they didn't consider much to be important. Segment 2 have got much higher scores, and segment 1 have got higher scores again. If we look at the shading, we can see some of the differences between the segments being emphasized. For example, when we look at history and culture, it's basically the same in segments 1 and 2. They've both got scores of 7. If we look at the natural environment, it's a high score of 7 in segment 1 and a bit lower in segment 2. But when we go down to visiting friends and relatives, we can see that this is a reasonably important issue for segment 1, but only half as important for segment 2. And as I showed you in the example before, we could of course go through and profile the segments and see how these segments differed by other things. Please go to the blog and check out any other videos and blog postings we have on how to use DataCracker.